The first tremor was small, barely noticeable, just a faint shiver through the soles of Xavier Lorne's boots as he adjusted the straps on his oxygen pack. He glanced up from his crouch, narrowing his eyes at the dark walls of the tunnel ahead. The rock was dense, alien, and laced with veins of something not quite mineral and not quite metal. It pulsed faintly, as if exhaling. Behind him, the alien team leader, Walter, turned both of his forward-facing eyes in Xavier's direction. "Did you feel that?" Xavier asked, standing now, brushing gray dust from his knees. "That was nothing. Standard seismic resonance. These tunnels were stable for over 1,000 cycles," Walter replied. Though his voice had lost its earlier certainty, Xavier didn't argue. He just tapped the side of his helmet to activate the internal recorder and muttered, "Tunnel integrity questionable. Proceeding with caution." The recon mission had started 2 hours ago. The goal was simple: chart a viable route through the collapsed understructure of the ancient Khoran city, buried deep beneath the planet's surface. The aliens, 3 of them, all from the diplomatic corps, had insisted on accompanying him to verify the findings firsthand. Xavier hadn't wanted them along. He didn't trust people who brought ceremonial flags and wore ornate breastplates on a field mission. "Move forward," Walter ordered. The corridor bends left. "Scan for structural weaknesses." Xavier stepped into the lead, his lamp casting a narrow cone of light through the jagged passage. The walls seemed to lean inward like they were listening. "Xavier," one of the others called, the one named Osen. "What is that sound?" Xavier froze. He heard it too now. A low groaning, subtle but growing, then sharper cracks echoing from above. "Back up slowly," he said, voice low but firm. Walter stepped forward instead. "We are nearly through." The map indicates a thunderous crack split the air, and the ceiling above them began to collapse. "Move," Xavier shouted, grabbing Osen's arm and pulling him back just as a slab of rock the size of a small car slammed into the floor where they'd been standing. The tunnel shuddered and dust filled the air. Xavier stumbled, hit the ground hard on his shoulder, and rolled. He coughed violently, trying to clear his lungs as debris rained down around them. Walter screamed something in his native tongue, and the third alien, Rishu, bolted in the opposite direction, slamming into a wall as more ceiling caved in. Xavier crawled toward the side wall, dragging Osen with him. His helmet's visor cracked down the center, and he tasted blood in his mouth. A sharp pain flared in his left wrist, but there was no time to check it. Walter was pinned under a slab, his legs twisted unnaturally. He wasn't yelling anymore, just staring at the ceiling like it might fall again any second. "We can't stay here," Xavier muttered. "The whole tunnel's coming down." Osen was shaking, his skin normally a pale blue now a sickly shade of gray. "Help him," Osen said, gesturing to Walter. "I can't lift 500 pounds of rock with a busted wrist," Xavier snapped. "You want him out, you help me." Osen looked at the slab, then back at Xavier. "His spinal ridges are crushed, he won't walk again." "Then we drag him," Xavier said. "He's not dying in a hole." Together, they pulled Walter free inch by agonizing inch. Xavier's wrist throbbed with each movement, but he gritted his teeth and didn't stop until all 3 were pressed against a recessed alcove carved into the wall. The tunnel groaned again. "We need another way out," Xavier said, his voice hoarse. "There is no mapped route," Osen replied. "This is the only known corridor." "Then I'll find one," Xavier said, standing. "You cannot go alone. The structure is unstable." "Exactly why I'm not dragging 2 injured people through it." Osen's gaze flicked toward Walter, then back to Xavier. "If the ceiling drops again," Xavier said, "your best chance is if I find another way and come back." He didn't wait for approval. Xavier slipped out of the alcove, moving low and fast. He retraced their path until he hit the fork in the tunnel, then turned right instead of left. The path was narrower, filled with debris and tight squeezes, but it hadn't collapsed yet. He passed ancient statues half buried in rubble, inscriptions etched in glowing script, and a floor that began to slant downward. 10 minutes in, his wrist had swollen badly. He paused behind a broken pillar, tore a strip of fabric from the inside of his jacket, and fashioned a makeshift sling. The pain dulled, but only slightly. His helmet's scanner pinged. A weak signal airflow. He followed it, crawling through a narrow crawlspace barely wide enough to fit his shoulders. It stank of stagnant moisture and old metal. When he emerged, he found himself in a chamber with a high ceiling and a broken platform in the center. He scanned the walls. There an archway leading into another corridor, one untouched by the collapse. He marked the spot on his scanner and turned back. Halfway through the crawlspace, another tremor hit. The rock shifted. Dust filled the air. A chunk of debris fell onto his back, pinning him. He screamed, more from shock than pain, and pushed with his legs. The rock shifted just enough for him to slide free, tearing his jacket and skin along the way. By the time he made it back to the alcove, his face was streaked with sweat and grime. "There's a path," he said, collapsing beside Osun. "It's tight, but it leads out." Walter was conscious now, but barely. His breathing was shallow. "We cannot move him far," Osun said. "You'll have to carry him," Xavier replied. "I'll go first, clear the way." It took everything they had. Xavier led, moving slowly but steadily, clearing debris, marking low ceilings, and keeping pressure off his wrist. Osun followed, hauling Walter in a harness they fashioned from rope and fabric. A few times they had to stop and rest. Xavier's vision swam from dehydration and pain. Once he nearly passed out, waking only when Osun splashed water on his face. When they reached the chamber with the broken platform, Xavier sank to the floor, gasping. "We're close," he said. "Just beyond that door." Osun nodded, too tired to speak. Together they pushed through the archway and into the final corridor. It was narrow but solid, and at the end a shaft leading upward with a rusted ladder carved into the wall. Xavier looked up. "That's our exit." He climbed first slowly, one rung at a time. His wrist screamed in protest, but he kept going. When he reached the top, he pried open the hatch and sunlight poured through. They emerged in the ruins of a courtyard, the sky above them pale red. Xavier lay on his back in the dust, blinking against the light. Osun pulled Walter up last, collapsing beside him. "You did it," Osun said, staring at Xavier. Xavier barked a short laugh. "Next time we scan the tunnels from orbit before walking into them." Osun looked down at Walter. "You saved him." "I saved all of us," Xavier said, closing his eyes. "By taking the route you said didn't exist." Neither spoke after that. They just lay there, breathing in the sharp, clean air, while the collapsed tunnel behind them buried the map forever. Xavier's shoulder had gone numb by the time the medevac shuttle groaned down into the cratered courtyard, its landing jets scattering old dust into spirals that clung to the exposed skin on his neck. He didn't move. Not because he couldn't, though most of his left side felt like it belonged to someone else, but because lying still on warm, sun-baked stone was the only thing keeping his vision from tilting sideways again. Rishu stepped in front of the shuttle before the crew could disembark, arms raised in a gesture that might have meant wait, or we are not contagious, or possibly, do not touch the tall one with blood on his face. The crew halted anyway, clearly unsure how to interpret the expressionless blue face staring them down. "Is that one alive?" the pilot asked, pointing at Xavier's sprawled form. "I'm not dead," Xavier croaked. "Just reconsidering my life choices." The pilot and a second crew member exchanged a glance. Then the second one stepped forward and knelt beside him. "Name, Xavier Lorne," he muttered, blinking against the sun. "Field technician, Earth Union, probably concussed, definitely dehydrated, left wrist fractured, might be broken in 2 places, right ankle's not weight-bearing, and eyed like a sandwich." The medic's eyebrows shot up. "You self-diagnosed all that. Welcome to Earth," Xavier said, "where our health insurance is basically Google and duct tape." Rishu cocked his head. "Is this humor or genuine despair?" "Little of both," Xavier said, then grimaced as the medic gently pressed around the swelling on his wrist. "No open fractures. We'll stabilize it for transport." "Great. Can you do something about the pounding behind my eyes?" "After we get you on the shuttle." Osun had positioned Walter on a stretcher fashioned from scavenged conduit rods and the remains of a ceremonial banner. The irony of that was apparently lost on the alien, whose own clothes were now caked in dried blood and tunnel dust. He hadn't spoken since they'd reached the surface. Xavier watched as 2 crew members carefully lifted Walter aboard. There was no screaming, no twitching. Just a long, thin exhale that might have been unconsciousness or resignation. Vitals are shallow but stable, the shuttle's AI reported. Stable, Osen repeated under his breath, as if trying the word out for the first time. The pilot motioned toward Xavier. We need to move you now. I can walk, Xavier said. You just said your ankle's useless. Right. Then I can limp. Before they could argue, he rolled to his side, braced against the stone with his good arm, and lifted himself. His vision narrowed to a pinhole for a second, and his ears rang like a tuning fork had been struck behind them. He took a step. The ankle screamed, but he stayed upright. See, he grunted. Graceful as a drunk giraffe. Rishu followed him onto the shuttle, watching carefully without offering assistance. Xavier appreciated that more than he could explain. Once inside, the doors sealed, and the cabin descended into the gentle hum of pressurized air and antiseptic lighting. The medic wrapped his wrist in a rigid foam splint while another applied a cooling patch to his temple. It tingled, then spread relief like a slow tide. Why didn't you wait for us to dig you out? Rishu asked from across the cabin. Because we didn't have time. You could have died. Xavier glanced at him. So could you, but you followed me anyway. I was uncertain of your plan. Yeah, so was I. The medic raised an eyebrow. You're telling me you went crawling into a collapsed tunnel network with no exit strategy? Not exactly, Xavier said. I had a theory, based on airflow, temperature differential. The way sound bounced off the rock, it felt off. Rishu's eyes narrowed. You made a decision based on feeling, not just feeling, Xavier said. Experience. I've been in my share of unstable systems. You learn to read the signs. That is not how we are trained. Maybe that's why you needed me down there. Osen stirred in his seat. You defied protocol. You left us behind. I also came back, Xavier said, which, statistically, wasn't the most likely outcome. Silence settled in the cabin, broken only by the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional hiss of compressed air from the medkits. After several long minutes, the shuttle lifted from the ruins and banked toward the orbital station that hovered above the atmosphere like a waiting sentinel. The view outside the window was all red stone and fractured terrain recently disturbed, like something had clawed its way out instead of in. As they gained altitude, Xavier leaned back and closed his eyes. Do humans often survive like this? Rishu asked quietly. Like what? With no clear route, no oversight, and only instinct, Xavier didn't open his eyes. It's kind of our thing, more silence, this time heavier. Then Osen said, your physiology is unsuited for our environments. Your internal organs are fragile, your bones are hollow compared to ours, and yet, you adapt. Xavier cracked one eye open. I'm not hollow, I'm just efficient. That may be true. But it is also terrifying. You think I'm terrifying. You survived a structural collapse by improvising with no backup, no map, and a malfunctioning scanner. I also cried a little when I thought I dislocated my shoulder, Xavier admitted. But thanks. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. We'll dock in 4 minutes. Med Bay's been alerted. Tell them to warm up the bone knitter, Xavier said, and maybe bring snacks. Rishu stared at him. You joke as if none of this is unusual. It's not unusual, Xavier said. It's just Tuesday. The shuttle docked with a soft thud. A team of med personnel waited in the airlock, their carts and instruments already humming. As they stepped aboard, one of them pointed at Xavier's wrapped wrist. Do you have a pain rating? About a 7 when I breathe, a 9 when I laugh. And your ankle feels like a bear trap made of regret. They nodded, unfazed, and helped him onto a gurney. He let them. Pride was useful in a tunnel, but up here it mostly got in the way. As they rolled him down the corridor toward the med bay, he heard Rishu ask one of the techs, do humans always treat trauma with sarcasm? The tech didn't look up. Only the ones who survive. Inside, the med bay was all white surfaces and soft lighting, and the air smelled faintly of citrus antiseptic. Machines clicked softly. The bone knitter chirped as it scanned Xavier's arm. 2 fractures, the doctor said. Clean. We'll have you braced and stable in 20. I've got a meeting with command in 30, Xavier said. You won't be walking there. I'll crawl if I have to. The doctor gave him a long look, then began prepping the stabilizer. Most of our personnel would have waited for rescue, she said. You didn't. That's because your personnel aren't human, Xavier said. We don't wait well. After a pause, she added, Rishu requested your medical report be shared with his department. Why? To study your methods, Xavier chuckled. Great. Can't wait to be a case study in reckless behavior. The doctor began the bone knitting procedure. Xavier winced, then relaxed as the dull ache began to fade. Outside the med bay, another tremor shook the orbital station, faint but unmistakable. Xavier's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. Was that from below? No, the doctor said. Something shifted in orbit, one of the debris fields, nothing critical. He didn't reply, just looked up for a few seconds longer, then let his eyes close. He'd crawled into a death trap, dragged aliens through a crumbling maze, and found an exit where none should have existed. And now, he had to explain it to a room full of beings who still believed maps were gospel and instinct was chaos. He smiled faintly to himself, then dozed off as the machine hummed on. 2 days after the tunnel collapse, Xavier Lorne sat upright in the recovery ward, elbow deep in a tray of sterilized components he wasn't technically cleared to touch. His wrist was encased in a medical brace that hissed and adjusted with tiny servos whenever he moved too quickly, which was often. The ankle was wrapped tight, elevated, and currently propped on a portable diagnostics case. He had been instructed to rest. Instead, he was rebuilding a drone. Lieutenant Lorne, that device is not listed on your rehabilitation schedule, said the orderly posted near the entrance. The alien's eyes blinked out of sync, 2 up, 1 down, a pattern Xavier had learned meant mild irritation. Neither was climbing into a collapsing city, Xavier said, not looking up. But here we are. You are under medical supervision. Tampering with equipment violates protocol. I'm not tampering, he said, adjusting the drone's stabilizer rotors with a borrowed torque driver. I'm improving morale, mine mostly. The drone chirped as it booted up. It hovered shakily for a second, then zipped sideways and clunked into the wall. Xavier winced. Still working out the kinks, he muttered. Little guy's got enthusiasm but no sense of direction. Like me at 19. The orderly walked away without another word. Whether in protest or resignation, Xavier didn't care. At the other end of the ward, Osen paced with short, measured steps, hands clasped behind his back. His face was unreadable, but his antennae twitched every time someone entered the room. He hadn't spoken much since the evacuation, not out of hostility, more like someone trying to process a language with too many new syllables. You can stop pacing, you know, Xavier called. The floor's not going anywhere. It's one of the few things in this building that hasn't tried to kill us. Osen turned but didn't approach. You are not following post-incident protocol. I'm not built for protocol. That much is evident. Xavier set the drone aside and stretched his back until it popped. You're not here just to critique my posture, so let's hear it. Osen hesitated. Walter will recover, but he will not return to fieldwork. I figured. He submitted a report. It names you as the sole reason for our survival. Well, I wasn't going to let you two become honorary fossil displays. That is not the part that concerns me. Xavier raised an eyebrow. You're worried he gave me credit. I am concerned that your decisions, while effective, were irrational by our standards. You risked your own life repeatedly without any certainty of success. That's called adapting. It's called gambling. Same thing if you're good at it. Osen stepped closer, his tone tightening. You crawled into an unstable corridor with a broken wrist and no guarantee of breathable air. There was airflow. You guessed there was airflow. Educated guess. You also splinted your own arm with a torn sleeve and a piece of conduit. I was out of gauze. Then you dragged my superior through debris while concussed. I'm not saying it was comfortable. Osen's eyes narrowed. You joke about this. Because if I don't, I'll start thinking about how close we came to dying. Humor's just panic in disguise. Osen looked down at the drone on the floor. It blinked once and spun in a tight circle. You repaired this without schematics. I've built worse things out of a toaster and 4 spoons. Osen didn't respond immediately. Then, almost reluctantly, he sat. Our analysts reviewed your helmet footage. They called it erratic. Thanks. But they also called it instructive. Xavier tilted his head. Instructive how? They don't understand how your judgment functioned. You bypassed mapped routes, ignored chain of command, and used noise echoes to navigate infrastructure that hasn't been touched in millennia. I wasn't trying to be unpredictable. I just didn't want to die under a decorative ceiling. Osen studied him. We are a species that favors systems. You are a species that survives systems failing. That's not wrong. It unsettles us. You think it's scary now, wait until you see what we do when coffee's involved. Osen paused. You are difficult to categorize. Good. Categories are for museum exhibits. The door hissed open and Rishu entered, carrying a small data slate. He nodded to both of them, then glanced at Xavier's ankle. You're upright, mostly. The debrief is scheduled in 1 hour. Xavier groaned. Can't I submit a haiku instead? Something like, collapsed tunnel size / human limps out, dust in teeth / everyone confused. Rishu ignored him. The commission wants to know how you made your decisions. Tell them I listen to the rocks. No metaphors. They require specifics. Xavier stood slowly. Fine, I'll draw them a diagram of the echo patterns if they give me a whiteboard in 30 minutes. Rishu looked to Osen. He's being flippant again. He says it calms him. Rishu sighed. Then we'll allow it. The debriefing room was colder than the recovery ward, with walls that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. 4 members of the inquiry board sat behind a curved table, each wearing the pale green insignia of the Coalition Oversight Bureau. None spoke as Xavier entered and sat. One of them, an elder with translucent cranial ridges, leaned forward. Explain your decision to deviate from the mapped route. Xavier crossed his arms. The mapped route was collapsing. How did you determine that? Dust behavior changed. The air got heavier. I heard a low-frequency rumble that didn't match previous seismic activity, and the walls started sweating. Sweating. Condensation formed along seams that hadn't shown moisture before. That meant pressure was building behind them. Another board member, younger and sharper in tone, interjected. You're not a geologist. No, but I'm a field tech with 15 years of watching things break. I know the difference between normal and run. You acted alone. Because no one else was moving, you left the injured. I came back. The eldest member tapped the slate in front of them. You chose a route that was unmapped and structurally unverified. Correct. And you succeeded. Also correct. There was a long pause. Then the sharp-voiced one spoke again. You understand this behavior cannot be standardized. Xavier shrugged. It's not meant to be, that's the point. You are unpredictable. Only when I'm right. The eldest stood. This debrief is concluded. Xavier blinked. That's it. You've given us what we needed. The rest is up to our analysts. Later, back in the recovery ward, Rishu handed Xavier a small badge. It was blank except for a single line of alien script. What's this? An informal commendation, not from the Bureau. From us. Xavier turned it over. What does it say? He who escapes the map. Xavier laughed. Catchy. Osen nodded. It is not meant to flatter. It is meant to warn others not to follow your example without thought. I wouldn't wish that tunnel on anyone. Rishu looked toward the window. Our reports will change. Protocols too, but slowly. Good, just leave a space in the manual for improvisation. Osen tilted his head. We may have to invent a new section entirely. Xavier leaned back, one leg propped on the diagnostics case again, drone buzzing faintly near his foot. Next time, he said, we bring better maps. Next time, Rishu replied, we bring you and better maps. Fair enough, Xavier thought, as long as they didn't expect him to follow them blindly, and for the first time in 2 days he rested properly.